Can I trade my shoes for some leftovers, sir? A starving 6-year-old girl begs the sterile millionaire CEO. What he does next breaks my heart. Before the story begins, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more emotional stories. The expensive Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor of the exclusive Manhattan restaurant as 42-year-old CEO Michael Thompson adjusted his platinum watch. The monthly board meeting had run late, and his perfectly tailored navy suit showed no signs of the stress that had consumed his afternoon. As one of the youngest executives to ever lead Sterling Industries, Michael had built his empire on precision, control, and an unwavering focus that had cost him everything personal in his life. The maitre d' approached with practiced deference. "Mr. Thompson, your usual table is ready. The chef has prepared your regular order." Michael nodded curtly, his steel-grey eyes scanning the dining room filled with New York's elite. At 42, he had everything money could buy, except the one thing that haunted his sleepless nights: a family. 3 failed marriages, countless fertility treatments, and a diagnosis that shattered his dreams of fatherhood had left him hollow inside, despite his billion-dollar success. As he stepped outside into the crisp October evening, the contrast between his world and the reality beyond his golden bubble was about to collide in a way that would change everything. The sidewalk was bustling with evening commuters, but something made him pause. A small voice, barely audible above the city noise, called out from the shadows near the restaurant's side entrance. "Excuse me, sir?" Michael turned, his business instincts immediately on high alert. In the dim light cast by the street lamp, he could barely make out a tiny figure huddled against the brick wall. As his eyes adjusted, his breath caught in his throat. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, sat on a piece of cardboard, her clothes tattered but surprisingly clean. Her blonde hair was matted, but her bright blue eyes held a determination that seemed far too mature for her age. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his voice softer than he intended. The child looked up at him with those piercing blue eyes, and what she said next would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. "Can I trade my shoes for your leftover food, sir? I haven't eaten in 2 days." Michael's heart stopped. The little girl lifted her tiny feet, revealing shoes that were little more than cardboard and tape, held together by sheer will and desperation. The sight of her small, dirty toes poking through the holes sent a shock through his system that no business deal had ever matched. But this was only the beginning of a mystery that would unravel everything Michael thought he knew about his life, his past, and the family he thought he'd never have. Michael's hands trembled as he knelt down to the little girl's level, his expensive suit touching the dirty sidewalk for the first time in decades. Up close, he could see the careful way she had tried to keep herself clean despite her circumstances. And something about her facial features stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma," she replied, clutching a small, worn teddy bear to her chest. "I'm sorry to bother you. Mister, I know you're probably busy, but I saw you coming out of that fancy restaurant, and I thought maybe—" Her voice trailed off, but Michael was no longer listening to her words. He was staring at her face, at the shape of her nose, the curve of her eyebrows. The way she tilted her head when she spoke, it was like looking into a mirror from 36 years ago. "Emma, where are your parents?" Michael managed to ask, though his throat felt tight. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the stoic determination of someone who had learned too early that crying didn't solve problems. "My mama died 3 months ago. She was sick for a long time. We don't have any other family." Michael's world tilted. "We?" Emma pointed to a shadowy corner where another small figure emerged, an identical little girl wearing the same tattered clothes, carrying the same type of worn teddy bear. The twins were mirror images of each other, and both bore an uncanny resemblance to someone Michael had tried to forget. "This is my sister Lily," Emma explained as the second girl approached cautiously. "We take care of each other." Lily hung back, clearly more suspicious of strangers than her sister. But when Michael looked at her, he saw the same eyes, the same features that had been haunting him since he first saw Emma. His mind raced back to a night 15 years ago, to a woman named Sarah who had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only a note that said she couldn't be part of his world. "How old are you girls?" Michael asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "We're 6, Emma replied proudly. "We'll be 7 next month on November 15th. The date hit Michael like a freight train, November 15th. Exactly 9 months after the last night he had spent with Sarah. The night before she vanished, taking with her what he now realized might have been the greatest secret of his life. But there was more to this story than Michael could possibly imagine, and the truth would prove more complex than a simple case of abandoned children. Michael's mind reeled as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. The twins stood before him, shivering in the cold October air, and all he could think about was Sarah's face the last time he had seen her. She had been pale, nervous, and kept touching her stomach in a way that now made perfect sense. "Girls, when is the last time you had a proper meal?" Michael asked, removing his coat and wrapping it around both children. The expensive cashmere swallowed their tiny frames. "Yesterday morning," Lily spoke for the first time, her voice barely audible. "A nice lady gave us half her sandwich." Michael's heart shattered. Without hesitation, he scooped up both girls, one in each arm, and carried them back into the restaurant. The maitre d' looked horrified at the sight of the disheveled children in the pristine establishment, but one look at Michael's face silenced any protests. "I need a private dining room now," Michael commanded, "and bring everything on the children's menu." As they waited for the food, Michael studied the girls more carefully. Emma was clearly the more outgoing of the two, chattering nervously about how pretty the restaurant was, while Lily remained quiet and watchful. Both had the same blonde hair and blue eyes, but there were subtle differences that only a parent would notice. "Emma, Lily," Michael said gently, "can you tell me about your mother? What was her name?" "Sarah," Emma replied immediately. "Sarah Mitchell. She used to tell us stories about a man she loved very much, but she said he lived in a different world than us." The confirmation hit Michael like a physical blow. Sarah Mitchell, the woman he had loved and lost, the woman who had disappeared without a trace, leaving him to believe she simply didn't want the life he could offer her. "Did she ever tell you about this man?" Michael asked carefully. Lily nodded slowly, speaking up for the second time. "She said he was kind and smart, and that he would have loved us very much if he had known about us. She said his name was Michael, and that he had grey eyes just like yours." The words hung in the air like a revelation. Michael felt tears streaming down his face, the first tears he had shed in over a decade. The children looked at him with concern, Emma reaching out to touch his cheek. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked with the innocent compassion that only children possess. But Michael couldn't answer. He was staring at something that had just changed everything. Around Lily's neck, barely visible beneath her tattered shirt, was a small silver locket, a locket he recognized because he had given it to Sarah on their last night together before she disappeared forever. The mystery was deepening, and Michael was beginning to realize that Sarah's disappearance might not have been a simple case of a woman choosing to leave, but something far more complex and heartbreaking. Michael's hands shook as he gently asked Lily about the locket. The little girl's fingers instinctively moved to protect it, her eyes wide with sudden fear. "It was Mama's," she whispered. "She made me promise to never take it off. She said it was from someone very special." "May I see it?" Michael asked softly, his voice barely steady. Lily looked to Emma, who nodded encouragingly. With trembling fingers, Lily opened the small silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, a picture of Michael from 15 years ago. And on the opposite side, a photo of Sarah holding two newborn babies. Michael's world collapsed. The image of Sarah, exhausted but radiant, cradling two identical infants, was proof of everything he had never dared to hope for. But why hadn't she told him? Why had she disappeared with his daughters? "Girls," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you something very important. I think I might be your father." Emma's eyes widened with wonder, while Lily studied his face with the careful attention of a child who had learned not to trust too quickly. "But why didn't Mama tell us?" Emma asked. "She always said our daddy was far away." Michael closed his eyes, remembering the last conversation he had with Sarah. He had been so focused on his business, so driven by success, that he had talked about nothing but work. About the long hours, the constant travel, the demands of building his empire. He had unknowingly painted a picture of a life that left no room for family. "I think your mother thought I was too busy to be a good father," Michael admitted, the words cutting deep. "But she was wrong. I would have given up everything for you." The restaurant manager approached their table, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional scene unfolding in his establishment. "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right? We need privacy," Michael said firmly. "And I need you to arrange for a suite at the Plaza Hotel tonight." As the food arrived, Michael watched his daughters eat with a mixture of heartbreak and determination. They were polite, careful not to waste anything, and they shared everything equally between them. These were children who had learned survival, not childhood. But as Emma reached for her glass of milk, something fell from her pocket. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Michael's heart stopped when he saw his own handwriting on the outside. "For Sarah, with all my love." It was a letter he had written to Sarah years ago, but he had never given it to her. How did Emma have it? And more importantly, what secrets did it contain that might explain why Sarah had really left? The mystery was far from over, and Michael was about to discover that the truth about his family was more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Michael's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter, his own handwriting from 15 years ago staring back at him. The paper was worn from being handled countless times, and he could see tear stains marking the aged parchment. "Where did you get this?" he asked Emma gently. "Mama kept it under her pillow," Emma replied, her small voice filled with innocence. "She would read it when she was very sad. She told us that if anything ever happened to her, we should find the man who wrote it." Michael's heart pounded as he read his own words from so long ago. "My dearest Sarah, I know I've been distant lately, consumed by work and building something I thought would make us secure. But I want you to know that you are the most important thing in my life. I dream of a future where we can have the family we've talked about, where I can be the husband and father I've always wanted to be. I love you more than my own life, and I promise that from now on you will always come first." The letter was dated 2 days before Sarah disappeared. Michael had written it after their last fight, when she had accused him of caring more about his business than their relationship. He had planned to give it to her the next morning, but when he woke up, she was gone. "Your mother never got this letter," Michael whispered, understanding flooding through him. "She left before I could give it to her." Lily looked up from her food, her blue eyes, so much like his own, filled with curiosity. "But how did Mama get it then?" Michael's mind raced. The only way Sarah could have had this letter was if someone else had given it to her. Someone who had access to his private papers, someone who knew about their relationship. "Girls, did your mother ever mention anyone else? Anyone who might have helped her after she left?" Emma and Lily exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that only twins possess. Finally, Emma spoke. "There was a lady who used to visit us sometimes. Mama called her Aunt Helen, but she said she wasn't really our aunt. She was very nice, but she always seemed sad when she looked at us." Michael's blood ran cold. Helen Sterling, his business partner's wife. The woman who had been Sarah's best friend, the woman who had access to his office, his personal papers, his private life. "Did this Helen ever give your mother anything? Any papers or letters?" Lily nodded slowly. "She gave Mama a big envelope once. Right before Mama got very sick. Mama cried after she read what was inside." Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Helen Sterling's name. After 15 years of no contact, she was calling him now, just hours after he had found his daughters. The timing was no coincidence. "Girls, I need to take this call," Michael said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "But I want you to know that whatever happens, you're safe now. I'm going to take care of you." As he answered the phone, Michael prepared himself for the truth about why Sarah had really left, and why Helen Sterling had waited 15 years to reveal the secret that had torn his family apart. The mystery was about to reach its most shocking revelation yet. Michael stepped away from the table. His phone pressed to his ear as Helen Sterling's familiar voice filled the line, but instead of the warm, friendly tone he remembered, there was something different. Desperation, fear, and what sounded like years of suppressed guilt. "Michael, I heard you found them," Helen said without preamble. "I need to see you, tonight. There are things you need to know about Sarah, about why she really left." "You've had 15 years to tell me the truth, Helen," Michael replied, his voice cold as steel. "Why now?" "Because I'm dying," Helen whispered, her voice breaking. "I have 6 months, maybe less, and I can't face whatever comes next, knowing that I destroyed the greatest love story I ever witnessed." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about?" "Meet me at the Central Park bench where you and Sarah used to have lunch. Bring the girls. They deserve to know the truth about their mother and about the sacrifice she made for them." The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at his phone in shock. He returned to the table where Emma and Lily were finishing their meal. Their small faces turned up to him with trust and hope. "Was that about Mama?" Emma asked, with the intuition that seemed to run in their family. "Yes, sweetheart. Someone who knew your mother wants to meet us? Someone who might be able to answer all our questions?" As they left the restaurant, Michael's mind raced with possibilities. What sacrifice had Sarah made? What had Helen done that she considered so terrible? And why had she waited until now, when she was facing death, to reveal the truth? The October wind whipped through Central Park as they approached the bench where Michael and Sarah had shared so many lunch hours 15 years ago. Helen Sterling sat hunched over, her once elegant frame now frail from illness. When she looked up, Michael saw the same blue eyes that his daughters had inherited, and suddenly another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Helen," Michael said carefully, "why do Emma and Lily look so much like you?" Helen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the twins. "Because Sarah wasn't just my best friend, Michael. She was my daughter. And these precious girls are not only your daughters, they're my granddaughters." The revelation hit Michael like a thunderbolt. Sarah had been Helen's daughter, which meant that Helen had been lying to him for 15 years about knowing where Sarah was. But why? What could have driven a mother to separate her dying daughter from the man she loved? "I need to know everything," Michael said, his voice barely controlled. "Starting with why you've been lying to me for 15 years, Helen nodded, her frail hands reaching out to touch Emma and Lily's faces. "The truth is more complicated than you can imagine, Michael. And it starts with a secret that my husband Richard has been keeping from you since the day you became business partners." The final pieces of the mystery were about to fall into place. And Michael was about to discover that the web of deception surrounding his family went deeper than he had ever imagined. Helen Sterling's frail hands shook as she pulled out a manila envelope from her purse, its contents yellowed with age and secrecy. The Central Park bench felt cold beneath them as Michael held Emma and Lily close, their small bodies trembling, not from the October chill, but from the weight of revelations that were reshaping their understanding of family, love, and betrayal. 15 years ago, Helen began, her voice barely audible above the rustling autumn leaves, I thought I was protecting everyone I loved. Instead, I destroyed the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed, the pure love between you and my daughter Sarah. Michael's jaw clenched as he struggled to maintain his composure in front of the twins. Sarah was your daughter, and you let me believe she was just your friend. How is that even possible? Helen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Emma and Lily, seeing Sarah's face reflected in their innocent features. I was 17 when I had Sarah. My parents, the Sterling family, were prominent in society even then. An unmarried teenage pregnancy would have been a scandal that could have ruined everything. So they arranged for me to disappear for a year, have the baby in secret, and then give her up for adoption. Emma tugged at Michael's sleeve, her blue eyes wide with confusion. Daddy, what does that mean? The word daddy hit Michael like a physical blow, and he saw Helen's composure finally crack completely. These were the first grandchildren she had ever been able to acknowledge, and the weight of 15 lost years pressed down on all of them. It means, Michael said gently, that sometimes families get separated by mistakes, sweetheart, but we're together now. Helen continued, her voice growing stronger with determination. Sarah was adopted by a wonderful family, the Mitchells. I watched her from afar her entire life, never able to tell her who I really was. When she started working at Sterling Industries as an intern during college, I couldn't resist getting closer to her. I became her mentor, her friend, the person she confided in about everything, including her relationship with you. Michael remembered those days vividly. Sarah had often mentioned Helen, how grateful she was for the older woman's guidance and friendship. The irony was devastating. He had been dating Helen's daughter while Helen pretended to be just a family friend. But why keep it secret from me? Michael demanded. Why not tell me the truth when Sarah and I got serious? Helen's face crumpled with shame. Because I was a coward. I was terrified that if you knew Sarah was my biological daughter, it would complicate your business relationship with Richard. Your partnership was just beginning to flourish, and I didn't want to be the reason it fell apart. Lily spoke up for the first time since they had sat down. Grandma Helen, did Mama know you were her real mommy? The simple question from the 6-year-old cut through all the adult complications and went straight to the heart of the matter. Helen reached out to touch Lily's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, my darling, I told her the truth 3 months before she left your father. I couldn't keep lying to her anymore, especially when I saw how much she loved him and how much she wanted to build a family with him. Michael felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. She knew you were her mother when she left me? Then why? Because, Helen interrupted, her voice breaking, Richard found out about our relationship, and he threatened to destroy everything, your business, your reputation, your future, if Sarah didn't disappear from your life permanently. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Michael stared at Helen, processing the implications of what she had just revealed. Richard Sterling, his business partner for over 15 years, the man he had trusted with half his fortune, had blackmailed the woman he loved into leaving him. He threatened Sarah directly? Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. Helen nodded miserably. He told her that if she didn't leave you and never contact you again, he would make sure that not only would your business partnership be destroyed, but that he would use his connections to ensure you never worked in this industry again. Richard has resources, Michael. Connections that go deep into places where reputations can be destroyed with a phone call. Emma and Lily listened with the solemn attention of children who had learned too early that the adult world was full of secrets and dangers. Michael pulled them closer, his mind racing with the implications. "But there's more," Helen continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah was pregnant when Richard made his threats. She was carrying your daughters, and she was terrified that if Richard discovered the pregnancy, he would find a way to use the children against both of you." The final piece of the immediate puzzle clicked into place. Sarah hadn't left because she didn't love him. She had left to protect him and their unborn children from a man who was willing to destroy lives to maintain his control. But Michael could sense there was still more to this story, something that Helen was struggling to tell him. And as he looked into her dying eyes, he realized that the worst revelations were yet to come. The autumn wind grew stronger as Helen Sterling continued her confession, her voice growing weaker with each revelation. Michael could feel Emma and Lily pressed against his sides, their small bodies absorbing the adult conversation that was reshaping their understanding of their mother's sacrifice. "There's something else," Helen whispered, her hands clutching the manila envelope so tightly her knuckles were white. "Something about Richard that you need to understand before you confront him." Michael's patience was wearing thin. 15 years of lies, 15 years of believing the woman he loved had simply abandoned him. 15 years of his daughters growing up without their father, all because of Richard Sterling's manipulations. "What else could there possibly be?" Michael asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. Helen opened the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a series of photographs and documents. The first photo made Michael's blood run cold. It was a picture of Sarah, clearly taken without her knowledge, walking to her car outside her apartment. The date stamp showed it was taken just days before she disappeared. "Richard had Sarah followed for months," Helen explained, her voice filled with disgust. "He documented everywhere she went, everyone she spoke to, everything she did. He was building a case against her, looking for anything he could use to discredit her if she ever tried to expose his threats." Michael flipped through more photos. Sarah at the grocery store, Sarah at the doctor's office, Sarah sitting in the park reading a book. The invasion of privacy was staggering, but what came next was even worse. "He had private investigators dig into her adoption records," Helen continued. "That's how he discovered she was my daughter. But he also discovered something else, something that I never knew until he confronted me with it." Helen pulled out an official-looking document with government seals and stamps. Michael recognized it as some kind of legal record, but the details were difficult to make out in the dim park lighting. "What is this?" Michael asked. "Sarah's original birth certificate," Helen replied, her voice barely audible, "the one that shows who her biological father really was." Michael felt the world tilt on its axis. If Helen was Sarah's mother, and this document revealed Sarah's father, then the implications for his relationship with Sarah and for Emma and Lily's heritage could be catastrophic. Helen. Who was Sarah's father? The older woman's face crumpled with shame and regret. "Robert Thompson, your father, Michael." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. The envelope fell from his hands as the full implications crashed over him. Sarah hadn't just been his girlfriend, she had been his half-sister. Emma and Lily weren't just his daughters. They were the products of an unknowing, incestuous relationship. "No," Michael whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. "That's impossible. My father died when I was 12. You're telling me he had an affair with you when you were 17? Helen nodded miserably. "Robert was my father's business associate. He was handling some legal matters for our family when I was a senior in high school. He was kind to me during a very difficult time in my life, and I fell in love with him. I didn't know he was married. I didn't know he had a son your age." Emma looked up at Michael with confused blue eyes. Daddy, what does this mean? Michael's mind reeled as he tried to process the genetic implications. If Sarah was his half-sister, then Emma and Lily could have serious health problems. The risks associated with children born from such close biological relationships were significant. Developmental delays, genetic disorders, increased risk of birth defects. But as he looked at his daughters, healthy, intelligent, beautiful children who had survived 6 years of hardship with remarkable resilience, he realized that whatever the biological risks might have been, these particular children had beaten the odds. "It means," Michael said carefully, "that our family is more complicated than we thought, but it doesn't change how much I love you both." Helen reached into the envelope one more time and pulled out the final document, a medical report dated just 3 months ago. "I had genetic testing done on myself and on samples of Sarah's hair that I had kept," Helen explained. "The results show that while Robert Thompson was listed as Sarah's father on the original birth certificate, he wasn't actually her biological father." Michael stared at Helen in confusion. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 17-year-old me lied on that birth certificate because I was scared and desperate. Robert Thompson was kind to me, and I convinced myself that he might have been Sarah's father because the timing was close. But the real father was someone else entirely, someone I was too ashamed to name." The relief that flooded through Michael was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by anger at the realization of what this meant. "Richard Sterling knew this was all a lie?" Michael demanded. Helen nodded. "He knew the genetic testing would eventually prove that you and Sarah weren't related, but he also knew that by the time the truth came out, Sarah would be long gone, and his threats would have accomplished their purpose." Michael stood up abruptly, his daughters still clinging to his sides. The manipulation, the cruelty, the calculated destruction of his family, it was all becoming clear. Richard Sterling had used false information to terrorize Sarah into leaving, knowing that the truth would never matter because she would never come back to verify it. But there was still one more piece of this puzzle that Helen hadn't revealed, and Michael could see in her dying eyes that the worst was yet to come. The Central Park bench felt like the center of a hurricane as Michael processed Helen's revelations. Emma and Lily stayed close to his sides, their small hands gripping his jacket as they sensed the storm of emotions swirling around the adults. The autumn darkness was falling quickly, and the park lights cast long shadows that seemed to mirror the dark secrets being unveiled. "There's one more thing," Helen said, her voice now so weak that Michael had to lean closer to hear her. "Something about why Richard was so desperate to separate you and Sarah, something that goes beyond business partnership or family reputation." Michael's patience had been stretched to its breaking point. "Helen, just tell me everything. No more pieces, no more partial truths. What else has Richard Sterling done?" Helen reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder, its surface worn from years of handling. 3 months ago, when the doctors told me I was dying, I decided I couldn't face whatever comes next without making this right. So I confronted Richard and I recorded our conversation. She pressed play, and Richard Sterling's familiar voice filled the air, cold and calculating even in the tinny reproduction of the small device. "You always were too sentimental, Helen. Sarah was a complication that needed to be removed, and I handled it efficiently. She was my daughter, Richard, my daughter, and you destroyed her life. I saved Thompson's life, and I saved our business. Do you have any idea what would have happened to Sterling Industries if the truth had come out?" "What truth?" "The genetic testing proved that Sarah and Michael weren't related." "Not that truth, Helen, the other truth. The truth about where Michael's startup capital really came from." Michael's blood ran cold as he listened to his business partner's voice on the recording. "What truth about his startup capital?" The money had come from his inheritance after his father's death, carefully invested and grown over the years, until he had enough to start his own company. Richard's voice continued on the recording. Thompson thinks his father left him a clean inheritance. He has no idea that Robert Thompson embezzled over $2 million from Sterling Industries before he died. Money that I've been slowly recouping through our partnership. The revelation hit Michael like a freight train. His entire business empire, everything he had built, was founded on stolen money. Money that Richard Sterling had been systematically recovering through their partnership agreements, their shared profits, their joint investments. "You've been stealing from me for 15 years, Michael whispered, though he already knew the answer. Helen nodded miserably. "Richard knew that if you married Sarah and eventually discovered the truth about your father's embezzlement, you might feel obligated to pay back the stolen money. That would have bankrupted you and ended the arrangement that was allowing him to recover his losses." Emma tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Daddy, are you okay? You look sick." Michael forced himself to focus on his daughters, these innocent children who had been caught in a web of adult deceptions and manipulations that spanned decades. Whatever financial complications existed, whatever lies had been told, these two little girls were his priority now. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he said, pulling both girls closer. Daddy just learned some things that surprised him. But Helen wasn't finished with her revelations. The recording continued to play, and Richard's voice grew colder and more threatening. "The beauty of the arrangement, Helen, is that Thompson will never suspect. He thinks we're equal partners, but I've been recouping the stolen money through every deal we've made. In another 5 years, I'll have recovered everything his father stole, plus interest. And what about Sarah? What about their daughters? What about them? Thompson believes Sarah left him voluntarily. He has no idea she's dead." The recording ended abruptly, leaving a silence that felt like a physical weight pressing down on them. Michael stared at the device, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. "Sarah is dead," he whispered. Helen's tears flowed freely now. "She died 2 years ago, Michael. Pneumonia that developed into complications because she couldn't afford proper medical care. She was living in a shelter with the girls, working 3 part-time jobs, trying to keep them safe and hidden from Richard's threats." The pain that ripped through Michael's chest was indescribable. While he had been building his empire, believing that Sarah had simply chosen to leave him, she'd been struggling to survive with their daughters, sick and afraid and alone. "Where are her ashes?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Potter's Field," Helen replied, "an unmarked grave because she died with no insurance and no family willing to claim her body. I didn't find out until months later when the girls were found living on the streets." Michael stood up abruptly, his daughters still clinging to him. The scope of Richard Sterling's cruelty was beyond anything he could have imagined. Not only had the man destroyed his family, stolen his money, and ruined the last years of Sarah's life, but he had allowed the woman he claimed to love to be buried in an unmarked grave. "Where is Richard now?" Michael asked, his voice quiet, but filled with deadly determination. Helen looked at her watch. "Sterling Industries board meeting. They're deciding on the merger with Harrison Corporation tonight. If that merger goes through, Richard will have access to enough capital to disappear forever, taking with him not just what he stole from you, but millions more from the Harrison deal." Michael looked down at Emma and Lily. These brave little girls who had lost their mother and spent months on the streets because of one man's greed and cruelty. They deserved justice. They deserved their father. And they deserved to see their mother properly laid to rest. But first, Richard Sterling needed to face the consequences of 15 years of lies, theft, and the destruction of an innocent family. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Sterling Industries building stood 37 floors above Manhattan, its glass walls reflecting the city lights like a monument to corporate power and success. Michael Thompson strode through the marble lobby with Emma and Lily at his sides, their small hands gripping his as they entered a world they had never imagined could exist. The security guard at the front desk looked uncertain as he saw the disheveled children accompanying one of the building's most powerful executives. "Mr. Thompson, the board meeting is still in session on the 37th floor. Should I announce you?" "No," Michael replied, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone that made the guard step back instinctively. "This is a surprise visit." As the elevator climbed toward the executive floors, Michael knelt down to speak with his daughters. In the past few hours, these two little girls had learned that they had a father, a grandmother, and that their mother had died protecting them from dangers they were too young to understand. "Girls, we're going to see the man who hurt your mother," Michael explained gently. "I need you to stay close to me and be very brave. Can you do that?" Emma, always the more outspoken of the twins, looked up at him with determination that reminded him painfully of Sarah. "Are you going to make him sorry for what he did to Mama? I'm going to make sure he can never hurt anyone else the way he hurt our family," Michael promised. The elevator doors opened to reveal the opulent executive floor of Sterling Industries. The boardroom was visible through glass walls, and Michael could see Richard Sterling at the head of a massive conference table, presenting charts and projections to a room full of suited executives. The Harrison Corporation merger, the deal that would make Richard Sterling incredibly wealthy while allowing him to escape the consequences of his crimes. Michael entered the boardroom without knocking, Emma and Lily still holding his hands. The sight of one of the company's most powerful executives walking into a crucial business meeting with two small children brought all conversation to an immediate halt. Richard Sterling looked up from his presentation, his face initially showing surprise, then confusion, and finally a flicker of something that might have been fear as he took in the sight of the two little girls. "Michael," Richard said, attempting to maintain his composure, "this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of finalizing the Harrison merger. Surely whatever personal matter you need to discuss can wait until—" "Everyone out," Michael interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Now." The board members looked uncertainly between Michael and Richard, but the authority in Michael's voice was undeniable. One by one, they gathered their papers and filed out of the room, leaving only Michael, his daughters, and the man who had destroyed their family. Richard Sterling straightened his tie and attempted a smile that never reached his eyes. "Michael, I don't know what Helen has told you, but she told me everything," Michael said quietly, "about Sarah being her daughter, about your threats, about the embezzlement, about Sarah's death." The color drained from Richard's face, but he maintained his composure with the skill of a man who had been lying successfully for decades. "Helen is dying, Michael. Cancer affects the mind sometimes. She's been saying all sorts of things that simply aren't true." Emma stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the corporate tension. "You're the bad man who made our mama go away." Richard looked down at the little girl, and for a moment his carefully constructed facade slipped. Michael saw recognition in the older man's eyes, recognition of features that clearly belonged to him, features that proved these children were exactly who they appeared to be. "Michael," Richard said carefully, "I don't know who these children are, but bringing them into a business environment is highly inappropriate. Perhaps we should call child services to—" "Touch my daughters," Michael interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, "and I will destroy you in ways you cannot imagine." The admission hung in the air, Michael had just publicly acknowledged Emma and Lily as his daughters, something he had never done before, something that changed everything about the power dynamic in the room. Richard's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications. "Your daughters. Michael, that's impossible. You're sterile. You've never been able to have children." "Apparently," Michael said, There were many things I didn't know about my own life. Just like I didn't know that my business partner has been stealing from me for 15 years. Richard's composure finally cracked completely. The mask of civilized businessman fell away, revealing the cruel, manipulative man underneath. "You want to talk about stealing?" Richard snarled. "Your father stole from me first. Everything you've built, every success you've had, was built on money that rightfully belonged to Sterling Industries. I've been taking back what was mine all along." Lily spoke up for the first time since entering the building, her small voice carrying the weight of 6 years of hardship. "Mama said the bad man would try to hurt Daddy too. She made us promise to be brave if we ever had to face him." The words hit both men like physical blows, but for different reasons. Michael felt the weight of his daughter's courage and their mother's prescient warnings. Richard Sterling realized that Sarah had prepared her children for this moment, had told them about the dangers they might face, had armed them with the knowledge they would need to help their father when the time came. The final confrontation was reaching its climax, and Richard Sterling was about to discover that some crimes have consequences that span generations, and that sometimes justice comes in the form of 2 brave little girls who refuse to let their mother's sacrifice be in vain. The boardroom fell silent, except for the distant hum of the city far below. Richard Sterling's face had transformed from its usual mask of corporate confidence into something desperate and dangerous. He moved toward his desk, and Michael noticed his hand inching toward the top drawer. "Stay where you are, Richard," Michael commanded, positioning himself protectively in front of Emma and Lily. But Richard's desperation had reached a breaking point. 15 years of careful manipulation, of slowly recovering what he believed was rightfully his, of maintaining control over every aspect of the situation. All of it was crumbling in the span of a single evening. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Richard said, his voice taking on a manic edge. "Sarah thought she was protecting you by disappearing. But she was protecting me. She knew that if the truth about your father came out, if people discovered that Robert Thompson was a thief, it would destroy Sterling Industries. Hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. Pension funds would evaporate. Entire families would be ruined." Michael felt Emma's small hand squeeze his more tightly. "That doesn't justify what you did to our family." "Our family?" Richard laughed bitterly. "You mean the family you would never have had if I hadn't covered up your father's crimes? You think Sarah would have loved you if she knew you were the son of a criminal?" The words were designed to cut deep, but they had the opposite effect. Michael realized that Richard Sterling's greatest weakness was his inability to understand genuine love. The kind of love that transcends circumstances and forgives past mistakes. "Sarah already knew about my father's embezzlement," Michael said quietly. "Helen told her everything before she left. She didn't leave because she was ashamed of me. She left because she was afraid of you." Richard's face contorted with rage. "That ungrateful little. She had everything she could have wanted. I gave her a job. I gave her opportunities. I treated her like my own daughter." "You treated her like property," Michael corrected. "Just like you've treated me for 15 years. Lily stepped forward, her blue eyes fixed on Richard with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 6 years. "Mama said you were sick inside, that you hurt people because you couldn't love anyone. She said to feel sorry for you." The simple words from the child hit Richard harder than any corporate threat could have. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, and Michael saw something broken and pathetic underneath. A man who had spent so many years manipulating and controlling others that he had forgotten how to form genuine human connections. "Feel sorry for me?" Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "I've spent my entire adult life cleaning up other people's mistakes. Your father's theft nearly bankrupted my family's company. Helen's teenage pregnancy almost destroyed our social standing. Sarah's relationship with you threatened everything I had worked to rebuild." Michael moved closer to the desk, his daughters still behind him. So you decided to play God with our lives. You decided who deserved love, who deserved family, who deserved happiness. I decided who deserved to survive, Richard shot back. Sterling Industries employs over 3,000 people. Their livelihoods depended on keeping the truth about your father buried. One family's happiness isn't worth 3,000 jobs. Emma's voice cut through the adult arguments with startling clarity. Mama said that people who hurt children are the saddest people in the world, because they forgot how to be children themselves. The observation was so unexpectedly profound that it stopped both men cold. Richard stared down at the little girl, and for a moment, Michael saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of the child he had once been before years of corporate ruthlessness had hardened his heart. But the moment passed quickly, and Richard's desperation returned with renewed intensity. "None of this matters now," he said, his hand finally reaching the desk drawer. "The Harrison merger will be finalized within the hour. By tomorrow morning, I'll have enough liquid capital to disappear to a non-extradition country. You can tell whatever stories you want about the past, but you'll never be able to prove anything." Michael realized with growing alarm that Richard was pulling something from the drawer, not a weapon, but a series of legal documents and what appeared to be a passport. "You're running away?" Michael asked. "I'm securing my future," Richard replied. "Something your father never learned how to do, something Sarah never learned how to do, something you're apparently too naive to understand." But as Richard gathered his escape materials, he made a crucial mistake. He turned his back on the three people who had just shattered his carefully constructed world, forgetting that desperate people, even 6-year-old desperate people, can be unpredictable. Emma and Lily exchanged one of their silent twin looks, and then, with the fearless determination that had kept them alive on the streets for months, they acted. Emma grabbed the landline phone from the conference table and began dialing 911, while Lily ran to the boardroom's glass wall and started pounding on it, screaming for help in a voice that could be heard throughout the executive floor. The sound of Lily's cries brought people running, security guards, late-working executives, cleaning staff, and within moments the glass-walled boardroom was surrounded by witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. Richard Sterling realized that his opportunity to escape quietly had just evaporated, and his desperation reached a dangerous new level. The final moments of their confrontation were about to unfold, and the courage of two little girls was about to determine whether justice would finally be served. The boardroom erupted into chaos as Lily's screams brought a crowd of Sterling Industries employees rushing to the glass walls. Security guards pounded on the locked door while Emma continued her call to 911. Her small voice clearly explaining to the dispatcher that there was a bad man who hurt our mama at Sterling Industries. Richard Sterling stood frozen in the center of the room, his escape documents scattered around him, his face a mask of defeat and desperate rage. The walls that had protected him for 15 years, corporate power, social connections, carefully maintained lies, were crumbling around him with shocking speed. "Open this door immediately," the head of security shouted through the glass. But Richard had activated the boardroom's security lockdown, a feature designed to protect executives during hostile takeover attempts. Ironically, it was now trapping him with the very people whose lives he had destroyed. Michael moved closer to Richard, his daughters safely positioned near the far wall where they could be seen by the crowd outside. "It's over, Richard. The police are coming. The FBI will investigate the embezzlement, and everyone will know what you've done." Richard's laugh was bitter and hollow. "You think this is over? You think exposing me will somehow bring Sarah back? You think those children will ever be normal after everything they've witnessed?" Michael felt a surge of protective anger, but before he could respond, Emma's clear voice cut through the tension. "We're not broken," she said, looking directly at Richard with startling composure. "Mama taught us that surviving hard things makes us stronger, not weaker." Lily nodded in agreement, adding, "And now we have our daddy, so we're not scared anymore." The simple declarations from the two 6-year-olds seemed to deflate Richard's last reserves of defiance. He sank into a chair at the head of the conference table, the same chair from which he had wielded power over so many lives for so many years. "You have no idea what you've cost me," Richard whispered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "I know exactly what we've cost you," Michael replied. "Your ability to hurt innocent people, your ability to steal and manipulate and destroy families, your ability to play God with other people's lives." The sound of sirens could be heard approaching the building, growing louder with each passing moment. Emma had managed to convey enough information to the 911 dispatcher to bring both police and FBI agents, who had been investigating Sterling Industries' financial irregularities for months without knowing about the personal connections. "There's something else you should know," Michael said, pulling out his phone and showing Richard the screen. "Helen Sterling isn't the only person who's been recording conversations with you. Every phone call, every meeting, every threat you've made for the past year has been documented." Richard looked up, with the last flicker of his old cunning. "That's illegal recording. None of it would be admissible in court." "Maybe not in criminal court," Michael agreed. "But it's perfectly admissible in civil court, where I'll be suing you for 15 years of stolen profits, emotional damages, and the wrongful death of Sarah Mitchell. And it's also perfectly suitable for the court of public opinion, where Sterling Industries' board of directors will decide whether they want to be associated with a man who terrorized a young mother into living in poverty with her children." The full scope of his situation finally hit Richard Sterling. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, public disgrace, professional ruin. Everything he had tried to prevent by manipulating Sarah and Michael was going to happen anyway. But now it would be accompanied by the additional charges of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. "The Harrison merger," Richard said weakly. "It will fall through. Sterling Industries will be worthless." "Sterling Industries will survive," Michael replied. "I'm going to buy out your shares for exactly $1, the same dollar Sarah had left when she died alone in that hospital. And then I'm going to rebuild this company into something that honors the memory of the woman you destroyed." The security lockdown finally disengaged as FBI agents overrode the system from outside. The boardroom doors burst open and federal agents poured in, followed by police officers and paramedics who had been called as a precaution. As Richard Sterling was read his rights and led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Michael and the twins one last time. "You'll never be able to prove I directly caused Sarah's death," he said. A last desperate attempt to minimize his culpability. Emma stepped forward, her small hand slipping into Michael's. "We don't need to prove anything," she said with wisdom far beyond her years. "Mama said that mean people always punish themselves in the end, because they can't be happy when they're full of hate." As the FBI agents led Richard Sterling away, Michael knelt down to embrace his daughters. In the space of a single evening, they had gone from homeless orphans to children with a father, a future, and the knowledge that their mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. But their journey was far from over. There would be legal proceedings, grief counseling, the challenge of building a family from the fragments that Richard Sterling had left behind. Most importantly, there would be the task of ensuring that Sarah Mitchell received the burial she deserved, and that her daughters grew up knowing the full truth about their mother's courage and love.